Good evening and a very warm welcome to English News Package with radio and television for the hour. Making headlines, lawful stay judgment to allow convicted members of Parliament to stay has existed before, but with no applicants. The completion of the Tonga Guideline for Healthy Living and Training Manual was marked today in a handover ceremony. And there is an increase of rubbish containing toxic gases being collected in town allotments and affecting the environment. We'll have these and more stories later in the bulletin, now with the news in details. There is on social media buzz about the judgment and legal proceedings that allowed 2 cabinet ministers to stay or keep their seats after being found guilty of bribery, since this is the first time something like this has happened. Paula with more on this story. The Chief Clerk to Parliament, Gloria Boleo, confirmed that this law had always existed, but no MP has ever applied to stay until recently. During a press conference this week, journalists questioned why previous MPs who were also convicted of crimes weren't given the same chance, but Boleo clarified that these members never applied to stay. Radio and Television Tonga News understands that only 2 members of Parliament applied for a stay as the Finance Minister, Honourable Tatafu Moimoi, and Internal Affairs Minister, Honourable Sione Sengsta Saulala. Saulala's resignation from his role wasn't accepted by the Prime Minister. However, the Supreme Court accepted their applications to stay until their appeal is decided in the Court of Appeal. Tonga are leading efforts in getting healthy food in the Pacific after becoming the first out of 6 Pacific countries to complete their guideline for healthy living and training manual under a program led by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, or FAO. Paula again with the details.
This morning, the Food and Agriculture Organization handed over the manual to the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Forestry. This program began in 2019 and was completed in December last year. During today's handover program, the Health Director, Dr. Siale Akauola, emphasized that every Tongan should have the right to choose a healthy lifestyle, especially since it is the best option to combat NCDs. The aim of the health promotion is to empower people. It protects you against many chronic non-communicable diseases such as heart disease, diabetes and cancer. There are 3 main elements that people must comply with it in order to have a healthy life, including physical, social and mental health. Many people think about determining healthy life is a Ministry of Health responsibility, but I believe 90% of encouraging healthy living are from home, schools, agriculture ministry, and foods that are available for the public. Meanwhile, the project coordinator Isileli Aholele said that the manual was set up due to the increase of NCTs in the Pacific, especially in Tonga. This program believes that because of COVID-19 and its restrictions, people are spending more time at home and aren't exercising or eating healthy food. The CEO of the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Forestry, Dr. Viliami Manu, said one of the ways that they are minimizing the consumption of unhealthy food is by increasing the tariff on sweet and fatty food. And the Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Health created an act to increase the tax of sweet food and fats food, as this is a way of discouraging people buying and consume sweet and fatty foods. Meanwhile, this manual will be submitted to the Cabinet before it goes back to the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Forestry to implement through programs for the public. However, the program was worth 340,000 paanga funded by the FAO. Paula for Radio and Television Tonga News.
For many years, there has been an increase in rubbish being collected in town allotments. Some of this rubbish contains toxic gases that are harmful to the environment. There are certain environment management acts and laws on how rubbish should be stored and laws that prohibit the storage and collection of rubbish that is bad for the environment in public areas but not town allotments. These wastes include broken refrigerators, microwaves, vehicles, to name a few. Senior Environmentalist Officer Filimone Lapao said that they can't enforce any laws to stop people who store and keep a lot of rubbish in their town allotments because that is private property. However, they can stop them if they receive complaints from the neighbors of these houses. I don't believe that there are toxic gases in broken vehicles, but we can all see the dirty oil that leaks out of it in the parking areas. I am unaware of any act for hazardous waste and toxic chemicals, but keeping these wastes can provide a breeding ground for mosquitoes and other insects that can harm human lives. If anyone breaks this act by throwing rubbish in areas that aren't garbage landfills and it affects the public, offenders can be fined more than 5,000 pa'anga or face months imprisonment. The environmental guidelines and law on how rubbish should be stored was established in 2016. To date, many people continue to break the law by not properly disposing of their rubbish, which includes the burning of rubbish. The volcanologist from the University of Auckland, Professor Shane Cronin, suggested that Tonga must learn from the events of the January 15th devastation and believes it would be unwise for resorts and homes to be rebuilt in the affected areas. This comes after the completion of the Hunga Submarine Volcano Survey, a local-based scientific investigation that was operated by the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources in collaboration with Professor Cronin. Cronin says Ganokbolu is now one of the most vulnerable areas to nature disasters, as proven by the aftermath.
So it was remarkable that whilst there were fatalities and there has been major infrastructure and housing damage, we were envisaging hundreds, if not thousands, of lives lost from the scale of this eruption. So there were elements of luck in terms of the eruption occurring in the afternoon and being witnessed, but it's not automatic for people to run from the coast. This is a result of education, of training, of natural background knowledge, traditional knowledge, all of these things put together. And it meant that when people fled the ocean and made for high ground on that afternoon, even though everything started getting dark and was terrifying, that actually was an action that saved so many lives. And so that was one thing that I found extremely remarkable from this eruption. When I first got here, I was astonished by how well everyone had picked up and carried on from the ashfall, because it was also a very significant amount of ashfall. Yes, I was very sobered once I went to the west and started seeing the scenes of damage there. And the type of damage there, and now the trees being gone, it actually is even more vulnerable than it was before. So those are things that I still weigh on my mind about the future safety, not necessarily where the villages are. I think some of the villages are located quite well because they're behind the main beach ridge, but along the beach face and along the beach front, where many resorts were located, these places are actually at even more risk than they were before because of the lack of trees and any other protection structures over there.
Cronin confirmed that the eruption was the largest recorded for in over 140 years, with the height of the eruption plume and the rate of its spread doubling that from the next largest event recorded at 1991 Pinatubo eruption in the Philippines.
And that's basically why we actually had to go and physically measure the run-ups. The other things that are very important for us to measure are indications of how high the water level was above the ground. So during this work, we visited something like 80 different locations around Tongatapu, on Whawha, Atata, Nuku'alofa, Tonga, Whanoi, Mango, all of these different sites, and we were measuring everywhere the height the tsunami reached, but also the depth of the water. And we can measure the depth of the water by picking out marks in the trees, debris being left up in the trees, and also by talking to people as we went to places and getting eyewitness information. So that took us a long time. That was a very long and complicated survey. But this is data that will now go into the much, much better warning models, much better land use models as well. And so what we can see from this initial look of this data is just in Tongatapu, obviously the wave heights were much bigger on the western side, on the kind of Kupulu Peninsula, and they were still quite large on the southern coast as well, and they were smaller along the northern coast because the wave had broken earlier and moved around the northern part of Tongatapu because of the reef complex to the north.
The tsunami reached a height of 18 meters in Tonga's western side, while waves reached up to 20 meters in Nomukeki Hapai. The Tonga Tourism Authority earlier in the year teamed up with the Oholei Beach Resort to organize meals and food stuff funded by the World Central Kitchen to support families affected by the Hunga-Tonga Hunga-Hapai volcano eruption and tsunami on the 15th of January. The operation tied in 16 caterers that prepared and distributed a total of 110,760 hot meals across 15 different locations and spread out to help those affected in Hapai and Ewa. Waifono Paula again with the details.
The foodstuff were prepared, packed and distributed starting from the 29th of January to the 18th of March. The timely distribution of meals would not have been made possible without the lead from the Tourism Authority, the Oholei Beach Resort, and support from the staff of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the National Emergency Management Office with the distribution. In addition to the generous food aid, the World Central Kitchen also donated 4,000 food relief, which were brought into Tonga on chartered vessels from Fiji in February, and also funded the safety equipment and fishing gear on the boats organized by Tongan celebrity and Olympian Pita Taufatofu, which were gifted to homes that were affected on the Hapai Islands who depends on boats for food, transportation and business. The Tonga Tourism Authority, on behalf of the tourism industry and the communities it supports, is extremely grateful to World Central Kitchen for its generous and timely support and stands ready to assist in the recovery efforts to its people of Tonga following the devastation. Meanwhile, the Tonga Tourism Authority will host online trainings for the tourism industry this Friday to upskill needs on food tourism and agri-tourism. Waifono Paula for Radio and Television Tonga News.
45 Tongan soldiers left for Australia yesterday as they prepare to participate in a military training program in Hawaii next month. This training will begin on the 29th of June and end on the 4th of August. However, these soldiers will prepare for the program in Australia. Augustino Sakalia from His Majesty's Armed Forces said that this trip is funded by the Australian government and 45 soldiers will travel to Hawaii on the 13th of June for the military training program. The training program is held every 2 years with about 20 countries participating. And the Tongatapu 10 People's Representative, Reverend Dr. Pohivatuenetoa, appeared in the Supreme Court this morning in relation to charges against him by Tongatapu 10 candidate Gabrieli Lanmata. This trial was initially scheduled to be held on Monday. However, it was postponed after Lanmata and his lawyer David Corbett requested for more time to confirm their witnesses before they are called to testify in court. The first allegation related to a 50 ba'anga rewarded or whakapale by the respondent's wife to an elector of Lapaha, Rinko Halafihi, during a barbecue get-together at the residence at Lapaha on the 18th of November last year. The second allegation was about an indirect assistance of water tanks by the respondent to Makafoto. The last allegation is about the road maintenance project at Lapaha. Lapaha is one of the villages of Tongatapu 10 constituency. This morning, the witness for the petitioner Hexo Fifita from the road maintenance project told the court about the project when it reached Lapaha last year. The legal counsel for the petitioner, David Corbett, questioned Fifita about the reason why the project to reach some of the private pathway to residences at Lapaha, and Fifita responded that it was part of the project, especially the residences of people living with hardship and elderlies. He added that it was not just the Tongatapu 10 that benefited from the project. People from other constituencies as well as Tongatapu 8 and Tongatapu constituency number 3. During the cross-examination, the legal counsel for the respondent, Clive Edwards, asked Fifita whether he knew there was a mutual understanding between the government and Lapaha that they would have to pay 50% for a full road maintenance project, which includes road tarring, and Fifita responded yes. Edwards again questioned Fifita whether it's true the people of Lapaha urgently wanted the project to be completed last year as they paid their share, and also with great concern that there's a possibility that there will be a new government following the election. Fifita responded yes, they were working tirelessly to complete it, not only at Tongatapu 10 constituency, but other constituencies as well. The trial will continue tomorrow morning at the Supreme Court.
That's our local news with radio and television Tonga News for the hour with Tonga Development Bank.
Tonga Development Bank does not charge you levy for using its currency exchange or DD services.
Sports is up next with Mark Ake, and it is kindly sponsored by Pacific Timber and Hardware.
Welcome to this evening's sports package in the local sports scene and rugby union. Tonga Rugby Union and the Ministry of Education and Training began a practical session with 65 primary school teachers today as part of their sports youth program. The training was held at the Teachers Training College, and participants were taught about numerous sports as the ministry aimed to take the school children's attention away from the devastation that befell the nation in January when Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai erupted in the beginning of the academic year. Primary schools continue to learn from home through online and broadcasted classes due to COVID-19 restrictions. However, primary school teachers have begun training on how to teach health, fitness, and sports for a time primary schools reopen. The Chief Education Officer of the Primary School Division, Anipolete, explained why the training was set up.
So our sports master, Hedmudi Pangai, was thinking of conducting this kind of program so that teachers can have an idea on how to tackle different kinds of sports so that students can be aware and know the skills and techniques on playing different kinds of sport when they return to school.
The training teaches football, rugby, netball, golf, and volleyball. They also said that these trainings extend to private and church primary school teachers in Tongatapu and in the outer islands. Last week, TRU and the ministry distributed over 500 rugby balls worth more than 6,000 pa'anga to 45 government primary schools.
And that concludes tonight's English news package. But before we part, there's one final look at tonight's top stories. Lawful stay judgment to allow convicted members of Parliament to stay has existed before, but with no applicants. The completion of the Tonga Guideline for Healthy Living and Training Manual was marked today in a handover ceremony. And there is an increase of rubbish containing toxic gases being collected in town allotments and affecting the environment. And that's it for tonight. Thank you for your company. I'm Ali Sidubo. Have a blessed evening.